What if the person who smiled politely held the elevator door was hiding the darkest secret imaginable? Welcome back to the Criminal Index, the channel where we explore the minds of the world's most notorious criminals and the systems that failed to stop them. Today's case? Jeffrey Dahmer, a man whose crimes were so gruesome, so calculated, and yet so quietly committed. They still leave us asking, what turned him into a killer? And how many more like him are hiding in plain sight? This is the full story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Before he became one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dahmer grew up in what looked, on the outside, like a normal suburban American family. His father, Lionel Dahmer, was a quiet, educated man, an analytical thinker, and a research chemist. His mother, Joyce, struggled with depression and anxiety and was often heavily medicated. It was unstable. There were screaming matches behind closed doors and long stretches of emotional neglect. At age 4, Dahmer underwent double hernia surgery, and according to his parents, that's when he seemed to change. They said he became withdrawn, disconnected, like something had shut off. He lost interest in playing with other kids. He became fixated on death. As early as 6 years old, Jeffrey would go looking for roadkill near his house. Not out of fear or sadness, but curiosity. He'd bring home dead animals and dissect them in the backyard. He kept a graveyard of bones in the woods behind the family home. To his father, Lionel, it seemed like harmless curiosity. He even showed young Jeff how to use acid to dissolve tissue and clean bones, believing it was just a boy being scientific. But this wasn't about science. This was about bodies. Still, silent, controllable. By 14, those fantasies involved necrophilia. By 16, he admitted he couldn't tell the difference between thoughts he'd never act on and thoughts he might. By the time Jeffrey Dahmer was a teenager, two worlds were forming, side by side. One was the world everyone saw, a quiet, awkward kid. The other world was darker, private, twisted, and it was getting louder. By high school, Dahmer had already developed an alcohol addiction. He was drinking alone, straight liquor in the morning, hidden in a soda can or under his jacket. When asked why, he simply said, "It numbed the thoughts." When his parents' marriage imploded completely with screaming matches, silent standoffs, and, eventually, a divorce. Neither parent wanted full custody of Jeffrey. And when his father moved out, Jeffrey was left alone. It was the summer of 1978.
What's your name? Jeff. Nice to meet you, Jeff. I'm Steven.
Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, a friendly guy, just 19 years old, heading to a concert. They hung off for a while, but after a few hours, Hicks said he wanted to leave, and something inside Dahmer snapped. He didn't want Hicks to leave, not again, not like everyone else had. So when Hicks turned around, Dahmer grabbed a 10-pound dumbbell and hit him from behind, then strangled him. It was his first murder. After his first murder in 1978, you might expect Jeffrey Dahmer to spiral out of control. Instead, he went quiet. For nearly a decade, there were no confirmed murders. After killing Stephen Hicks, Dahmer tried to return to normal. His father enrolled him in Ohio State University, but Jeffrey lasted just one semester. He barely went to class. So Lionel, desperate to fix his son, enlisted him in the army. Jeffrey was stationed in Germany as a combat medic. Two men would later accuse Dahmer of drugging and assaulting them during his service. He served for 2 years before getting discharged for alcohol abuse. They simply sent him home, and just like that, he was out in the world again. Back in the US, Dahmer bounced around. Eventually, he ended up in Milwaukee with his grandmother let him live in her basement. In 1986, he was arrested for exposing himself to a group of kids. then again in 1988 for drugging and sexually assaulting a teenage boy. But instead of prison, he was given probation, mandatory counselling, a warning. And in 1987, nearly 9 years after his first kill, he snapped again. This time, there was no turning back. In September of that year, everything changed. He met a man named Stephen Tuomi at a bar. They got a hotel room. They drank. And sometime during the night, Dahmer lost control. He later said he didn't even remember doing it, just waking up next to Tuomi's lifeless body. Blood on his hands. And what did he do? He bought a large suitcase and dismembered him in the basement. That marked the beginning of the killing spree. Over the next 4 years, Dahmer murdered 16 more young men and boys. Almost all were strangers. He took Polaroid photos of his victims. He kept skulls and genitalia as trophies. He even ate parts of them. He later admitted that consuming the flesh made him feel like his victims were a part of him forever. Neighbours complained about the smell coming from his apartment. Some reported hearing screams. Even power tools run at night. He was arrested multiple times, once for molestation. Still, he avoided prison. But eventually, he slipped. In May of 1991, he tried to murder a 14-year-old Konarak synthesomp phone. The boy escaped, drugged, bleeding, naked, and flagged down neighbours. They called the police, but when the officers arrived, Dahmer smiled. He told them Konarak was his boyfriend, and the officers believed him. They returned the boy to Dahmer's apartment. Hours later, Konarak was dead. Dahmer killed 4 more men after that, until one night he invited a man named Tracy Edwards to his apartment. Just like the others, he planned to drug him. But this time, Tracy fought back. He escaped. He flagged down the police. When the police entered Dahmer's apartment, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Then they opened a drawer and found Polaroid photos of dismembered bodies, jars of organs. It was a house of horrors. Dahmer didn't fight. When questioned, he confessed almost immediately, not just to one murder, but to all of them. He spoke in chilling detail, calm, precise. He even corrected the investigators on small facts. When the full story of Jeffrey Dahmer came to light, people weren't just horrified, they were angry. How did this happen? How did a man murder 17 people over 13 years and nobody stopped him? Could it all have been prevented? The answer, sadly, is yes. The officers in the Konarak synthesomphone case were later fired but reinstated. They claimed they were misled. But the truth is, they didn't care enough to look deeper. Let's rewind. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't just kill in secret. There were signs. So many signs. At 14, he was fantasizing about dead bodies. At 18, he committed his first murder. He was caught exposing himself in public. He was arrested for molesting a minor. He was sentenced to probation, not prison. He told court psychologists he was struggling with violent urges. Still, he was released, with no long-term psychiatric treatment. Then, in 1991, a 14-year-old boy escaped from his apartment, injured, dazed, and drugged. Neighbours called the police. Officers arrived and walked him right back into Dahmer's arms. That single decision alone cost that child his life. So yes, there were opportunities, missed by family, missed by police, missed by the system. This wasn't just the story of a killer. It was the story of a society that failed to act. A system that was more willing to trust a clean-cut white man than listen to the voices of black neighbours, immigrant families, and young gay men begging for help. It was racism, homophobia, negligence, all wrapped into one tragic, slow-burning disaster. Even Jeffrey Dahmer himself admitted he should have been caught much sooner. In his final interviews, he said, "I should have been in prison years ago. If the system worked the way it was supposed to, none of this would have happened." What creates a killer like this? Was he born broken, or did something or someone make him that way? And most chilling of all, Could it happen again? There's no simple answer, but there are lessons. We learned that monsters don't always look like monsters. They don't wear masks. They blend in. Sometimes they smile. They're quiet, polite. We learned how racial bias and homophobia can blind the justice system. If just one officer had looked at Dahmer differently, if one call had been taken seriously, 17 lives might have been saved. And we learned how neglect, at home, in school, in society, can breed silence. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't start out with blood on his hands. He started out as a lonely, lost, deeply disturbed child. That doesn't excuse what he became, but it explains why he was so dangerous for so long. In the end, Jeffrey Dahmer's story isn't just about evil, it's about what happens when no one's watching, when systems fail, when cries for help go unanswered, when the people we trust the most, teachers, judges, police, even neighbours, look the other way. What turned Jeffrey Dahmer into a killer? Maybe it was a twisted mind. Maybe it was years of emotional abandonment. Maybe it was everything. Maybe it was all of us. Because the scariest part of this story isn't just what Dahmer did, it's how long he got away with it.